My parents rolled their eyes when I walked into the courtroom, but the judge froze. After my millionaire grandfather died and left me everything, my parents, who had ignored me all my life, tried to sue me for the money, claiming I manipulated him. When I took my seat at the defendant table, my mother laughed out loud, but the judge looked at me and said, "Wait, the charges are against you." They never knew who I really was. My name is Nicole, and at 34 years old I have learned that blood is not always thicker than water. Sometimes blood is just a stain you have to scrub out. Before I tell you how I took down my entire family with a single hard drive, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of your family. The heavy oak doors of the Boston family court swung open, and the smell of stale coffee and anxiety hit me. I kept my head down, clutching my worn-out leather bag to my chest. Across the aisle, the air smelled expensive. My father Richard and my mother Cynthia were already seated at the plaintiff table, looking less like grieving children and more like they were attending a gala. Mom was wearing a vintage Chanel suit that cost more than my first car, and Dad was adjusting his silk tie, laughing at something my sister-in-law Jasmine just said. Jasmine was radiant and terrifying. As a high-powered real estate attorney, she knew exactly how to suck the oxygen out of a room. She sat next to my brother Brandon, who was busy picking lint off his Italian blazer. They looked like the perfect American family, successful, beautiful, united. And then they saw me. The laughter cut off, instantly replaced by a silence so cold it could freeze water. Mom didn't even bother to whisper. She leaned over to Dad, her eyes scanning my outfit with undisguised disgust. "Look at her, Richard. She honestly showed up to court wearing that rag. I told you she has no shame. It is embarrassing to even be seen in the same room as her." I smoothed down my gray skirt, which I had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. It was part of the uniform part of the camouflage I had perfected over a decade. To them, I was Nicole, the failure, the transcriptionist who typed other people's words for pennies. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my face neutral, pulling out my chair. Jasmine smirked, tapping her manicured fingernails against the mahogany table. "Don't worry, Cynthia. This will be quick." With the undue influence motion, I filed "The judge will see she is just a desperate broke girl who took advantage of a senile old man. She does not even have a lawyer. Look at her. She probably could not afford a bus ticket here, let alone legal representation." Brandon snickered loud enough for the bailiff to look up. "Just make sure she doesn't ask us for gas money after you win, Jasmine." I adjusted my glasses and opened my laptop. The screen was black, but the little green light was blinking. They thought I was typing court transcripts for minimum wage. They had no idea I was logging into the federal database that was currently tracking every single dollar they had stolen. My mother let out a dramatic sigh and turned her back to me, effectively erasing my existence. I was used to it. For 34 years I had been the ghost in their mansion. But today, the ghost had brought a sledgehammer. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, and the room scrambled to stand. Judge Patterson entered with the gravity of a man who had seen every variety of human deceit and had no patience for any of it. He ascended the bench and arranged his robes, his face a mask of stone. My father Richard buttoned his suit jacket, puffing out his chest to look like the respectable business tycoon he desperately wanted to be. My mother Cynthia wiped away imaginary tears, playing the part of the distraught daughter to perfection. Beside them, Jasmine stood tall, her posture radiating the arrogance of a predator who had cornered wounded prey. I remained still, my hands folded on the empty table in front of me, waiting for the inevitable collision. Judge Patterson picked up the docket, reading the case name aloud. "Estate of Henry Davis, Richard Davis versus Nicole Davis." He looked up, his eyes scanning the plaintiff table first. He nodded politely at Jasmine, acknowledging her status as an officer of the court. Then his gaze slid to the defendant's side. He froze. His hand, reaching for his water glass, stopped in mid-air. He blinked once, then twice, leaning forward as if trying to adjust a camera lens. He removed his reading glasses, staring directly at me with an intensity that made the bailiff shift uncomfortably. "Ms. Nicole." His voice was not the booming command he usually used. It was quiet, laced with genuine confusion. "Am I reading this correctly? You are the defendant in this matter." Before I could open my mouth, my father lunged to his feet. "Yes, Your Honor, and it is a disgrace," Richard shouted, his face twisting with manufactured outrage. "She is a fraud. She manipulated a dying man. She took advantage of my father's dementia to cut his own son out of the inheritance. She should be in jail, not just in civil court." The sound of the gavel striking the block was so loud it made my mother jump. "Silence!" Judge Patterson roared. The sheer volume of his voice seemed to shake the walls. "Richard, sit down immediately. You will not address this court or this defendant with such disrespect again. Do I make myself clear?" Richard slumped back into his chair, stunned. He was used to being the loudest voice in the room, the CEO who barked orders and watched people scramble. He wasn't used to being silenced. Jasmine quickly leaned in, whispering frantically to calm him down, her eyes darting nervously between him and the judge. Judge Patterson turned his attention back to me, ignoring my father completely. His eyes searched mine, looking for a signal. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was remembering the massive fraud case we had worked on last year, where I had uncovered $40 million in hidden assets. He knew my clearance level. He knew my ethics. The idea of me manipulating an old man for money was laughable to him. But he also saw my attire, the lack of counsel, and the distinct separation between me and my family. He was a smart man. He realized something complex was happening. "I am representing myself, Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "And yes, I am the defendant. My family has filed a motion claiming undue influence." The judge sat back, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "I see. Very well. We will proceed. But let the record show that I will tolerate no theatrics in this courtroom." I heard my mother whisper loudly to Jasmine, "Why does he know her? Has she been in trouble before?" Jasmine rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with disdain. "Probably for unpaid parking tickets or debt collection. Look at her, Cynthia. She is a mess. The judge probably recognizes her from the public defender list. It does not matter. He hates outbursts, so keep Richard quiet. We have this in the bag." They were so confident. They interpreted the judge's shock as recognition of a criminal, not a colleague. They had no idea that the man holding the gavel had once told me I was the finest auditor he had ever seen. I took a deep breath. Let them think they were winning. It would make the end so much sweeter. But to understand why my own father was ready to tear me apart in open court, we have to leave this room. We have to go back 2 weeks to a private room at Mass General Hospital where the smell of antiseptic could not hide the scent of death. 2 weeks earlier, the sterile silence of the Mass General Oncology ward was broken only by the rhythmic beeping of my grandfather's heart monitor and the soft clacking of my keyboard. I sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair next to his bed, balancing a bowl of lukewarm broth in one hand and my laptop on my knees. On the screen, lines of white code cascaded down a black background. To anyone walking by, it looked like gibberish, but to me, it was a roadmap. I was currently tracing a series of wire transfers from a construction firm in Boston to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It was ironic. I was hunting down financial criminals by day and spoon-feeding the man who built the very empire my father was destroying by night. Grandpa Henry was weak, his skin the color of parchment paper, but his eyes were still sharp. He watched me work, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. He was the only one who knew I wasn't just a transcriptionist. He didn't know the full extent of my work with the Department of Justice because that was classified, but he knew I was dangerous. He took a sip of the broth I offered him, his hand trembling slightly. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the tray table, vibrating violently against the plastic. It was a FaceTime request from Dad. I hesitated. I didn't want to answer it, but Grandpa nodded weakly, signaling me to pick it up. I swiped the screen, and the dimly lit hospital room was instantly illuminated by the blinding white glare of the sun reflecting off snow. My father, Richard, filled the frame wearing a bright red Montclair ski jacket that probably cost more than my rent. Behind him, I could see the rustic timber beams of a luxury lodge in Aspen, and my mother, Cynthia, was visible in the background, sipping champagne by a roaring fire. There was no hello. There was no concern. "Is he awake?" Richard barked, his voice distorted by the wind. "I have been trying to reach his lawyer all morning. Did he sign the power of attorney yet, Nicole? The board is breathing down my neck, and I need full control of the voting shares before the fiscal year ends." I angled the phone so he could see his father lying in a hospital bed hooked up to IVs, looking frail and exhausted. "Dad, he has been drifting in and out of consciousness," I said, keeping my voice low. "The doctors say it is a matter of days. Maybe you should fly back. He asked for you yesterday." In the background, my mother groaned loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Nicole, do not be so dramatic. We just got here. The tickets were non-refundable. Just put the pen in his hand and guide it if you have to. We need that signature. Brandon needs his trust fund release signed too, so make sure you get that done." Grandpa closed his eyes, turning his head away from the screen. He didn't want to see them. He didn't want to see the son he raised caring more about a signature than saying goodbye. "He is sleeping," I lied, my grip tightening on the phone. "I will not wake him for business paperwork." Richard's face turned red, contrasting with the white snow behind him. "You are useless, Nicole. Absolutely useless. Just get it done or do not bother coming to the funeral." The screen went black. They didn't even say goodbye. They didn't even ask if he was in pain. The room fell silent again, save for the hum of the heater. I set the phone down, feeling a familiar mix of rage and sorrow rising in my chest. I looked at my laptop screen where the cursor blinked steadily next to a file named Project Icarus. I wanted to tell them right then that I could freeze their assets with a single phone call. I wanted to scream that the money they were so desperate to control was already flagged by the FBI. Grandpa Henry reached out his cold hand, covering mine on the keyboard. His grip was surprisingly firm. I looked at him and saw tears welling in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. "Nicole," he whispered, his voice raspy but clear, "do not be angry with them. Anger makes you sloppy." He squeezed my hand, pulling me closer. "Listen to me. They think you are weak. They think you are nothing. That is your greatest weapon. They do not know who you are, and by the time they figure it out, it will be too late." He pointed a shaking finger at my laptop screen. "Promise me something. When I am gone, do not let them destroy what I built. You know where the bodies are buried, Nicole. You know where the money went. Use it." I looked at the code on my screen, then back at the dying man who had been my only ally. "I promise, Grandpa," I said softly. He smiled, closing his eyes for the last time that day. "Good. Now get back to work. I want to watch you catch them." Grandfather Henry passed away 3 days later. The funeral was held at the most exclusive parlor in Boston, a place where grief was measured by the size of the floral arrangements. While I stood by the open casket silently saying goodbye to the only man who had ever loved me, my parents were working the room. Richard was shaking hands with business rivals, accepting condolences with a practiced somber nod, while simultaneously hinting that the company was about to enter a new golden era. Cynthia was critiquing the caterer's choice of wine, whispering to Jasmine that the vintage was an insult to the family name. They weren't mourning a father. They were celebrating a promotion. When the service ended, the sky opened up. A freezing gray rain began to fall, matching the hollow feeling in my chest. The funeral director, a man with a face like a basset hound, began ushering the immediate family toward the line of black stretch limousines waiting at the curb. I buttoned my coat and lowered my head, following my parents toward the lead car. Dad got in first, followed by Mom and Jasmine. I reached for the handle of the open door, ready to take the jump seat, but a hand slammed against the window frame, blocking my path. It was Brandon. He stood in the doorway of the limousine, looking down at me with a sneer that twisted his handsome features into something ugly. He didn't move to let me in. Instead, he leaned out, lowering his voice so the funeral director wouldn't hear, though he didn't care if the other mourners did. "Where do you think you are going, Nicole?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I am going to the cemetery to bury our grandfather," I replied, my hand still hovering near the door handle. "Move, Brandon. It is raining." Brandon laughed, a short, sharp sound. He used his body to physically block the entrance. "This car is for the core family, Nicole. The people who actually matter to the legacy of this company. The people who belong in this world." He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my scuffed boots and the off-the-rack coat I wore. "You are just a transcriptionist, Nicole. You type words for a living. You do not belong in a vehicle like this. Honestly, look at you. You are soaking wet. You will dirty the Italian leather seats. We cannot have you smelling like wet dog next to Jasmine's Chanel dress." My mother's voice drifted out from the dark interior of the car. Brandon closed the door. "You are letting the heat out. If she wants to come, she can find her own way. She is used to taking the bus, isn't she?" Brandon smirked, the victory evident in his eyes. "You heard her. Call an Uber. Or better yet, walk. It might build some character." He slammed the heavy door in my face. The lock clicked with a sound of finality. I stood on the curb, the rain instantly soaking through my thin coat, as the sleek black vehicle pulled away, splashing muddy water onto my shins. I watched the taillights fade into the mist, feeling a cold rage settle in my stomach, heavier than the grief. I pulled out my phone and opened the Uber app. My finger hovered over the screen. I could have bought that limousine company with the assets I controlled. I could have called a federal convoy. But I didn't. I ordered a Toyota Camry rated 4.8 stars and waited in the rain. They wanted me to be an outsider. Fine. I would be the outsider who burned their house down. The Uber ride to the Davis estate took 40 minutes, giving me just enough time to dry my hair with the car heater, though my coat remained damp and heavy. The family mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured land in Brookline, a sprawling brick beast that I had once called home, but now felt like a fortress I was trying to breach. Cars lined the long driveway, Mercedes, Range Rovers, Bentleys. My Uber driver, a kind older man, looked nervous, just pulling up to the gate. I thanked him and walked the rest of the way, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots. Inside the house was warm and smelled of expensive lilies and roasting meat. The wake was in full swing. Waiters in white jackets navigated through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. My father was holding court near the fireplace in the grand library, swirling a glass of scotch and laughing at a joke a senator had just made. My mother was showing off her diamond earrings to a group of women who looked like carbon copies of her. There was no sadness here. There was only networking. I retreated to a corner near the heavy velvet curtains, trying to make myself as small as possible. I just wanted to pay my respects to the portrait of my grandfather that hung above the mantel and then leave. But in this family, silence was often interpreted as weakness, and weakness was an invitation to attack. I saw Brandon before he saw me. He was weaving through the crowd, a glass of dark red wine in his hand, his face flushed with alcohol and adrenaline. He spotted me in the corner, and his eyes lit up with malicious delight. He changed his trajectory, walking straight toward me with purpose. I braced myself, but there was nowhere to go. "Oops," he said loudly, just as he collided with my shoulder. The contents of his glass splashed across my chest. The cold liquid soaked through my white blouse, instantly the dark red stains spreading like a gunshot wound over my heart. The glass shattered on the hardwood floor, silencing the nearby conversations. Brandon didn't look sorry. He looked thrilled. He stepped back, looking at the mess he had made with a mock expression of surprise. "My bad, Nicole," he said, his voice carrying across the room. I didn't see you there. You blend into the wallpaper so well. He gestured to my ruined shirt, sneering. But honestly, I probably did you a favor. That thing looks like you fished it out of a donation bin. Consider this my way of buying you a new rag. Maybe now you will have an excuse to go shopping at a real store. A few guests chuckled nervously, unsure if this was a family joke or genuine cruelty. My father glanced over, saw the scene, and simply turned back to his conversation. He didn't care. Jasmine appeared at Brandon's side, slipping her arm through his. She looked at the wine dripping onto the floor and then at me. She didn't call for a waiter. Instead, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a cocktail napkin she had already used to blot her lipstick. It was crumpled and stained with pink makeup. Here, she said, thrusting the dirty napkin at me. Clean yourself up, Nicole. You are making a scene. Try not to drip on the Persian rug. It is worth more than your annual salary. I took the napkin, feeling the rough paper against my fingers. I looked at Brandon, who was waiting for me to cry or scream. I looked at Jasmine, who was watching me with cold amusement. And I looked at my parents, who were pretending I didn't exist. The anger in my gut was a cold, hard knot. I didn't wipe the stain. I simply dropped the dirty napkin into Brandon's empty hand. Keep it, I said, my voice steady. You are going to need it more than I will. I turned and walked out of the library head high, leaving them confused in my wake. I went to the guest bathroom to wash up, knowing that in less than an hour, the reading of the will would wipe those smiles off their faces forever. The heavy oak doors of the library thudded shut, sealing us in with the scent of old paper and greed. Mr. Henderson, my grandfather's attorney for 40 years, sat at the head of the massive table, arranging his files with slow, deliberate movements. He looked like an undertaker who had seen too many ungrateful heirs to be surprised by anything anymore. I took the seat furthest away, pulling my damp coat tighter around me. The wine stain on my chest was sticky and cold, a constant reminder of my place in this family hierarchy. Across from me, my parents Brandon and Jasmine settled into the high-backed leather chairs as if they were ascending thrones. Richard did not just sit, he sprawled. He kicked his feet up onto the polished mahogany surface, crossing his ankles right next to a stack of legal documents. He checked his Rolex, tapping the crystal face impatiently. All right, Henderson, let us get this over with. My father boomed, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. I have a tea time at the country club in an hour, and I do not intend to be late. We all know the drill. Pop left the company to me, the house to Mom, and some trust funds for the kids. Just skip to the signature page so I can fire the current CFO by Monday morning. Cynthia leaned over to Jasmine, not bothering to lower her voice. I saw the most exquisite Birkin bag in crocodile skin yesterday. I think I will treat myself once the wire transfer clears. It is what Henry would have wanted. He always loved seeing me look my best. I stifled a bitter laugh. Grandfather hated ostentatious displays of wealth. He drove a 10-year-old Ford and wore suits until they frayed. My mother did not know him at all. She only knew his bank account balance. Mr. Henderson stopped shuffling papers. He looked over his spectacles at my father's muddy shoes on the antique table. Mr. Davis, I would ask you to show some respect for the deceased and for the legal process, the lawyer said, his voice dry as dust. And I would suggest you do not count your chickens before they are hatched. The terms of this will are specific. Richard laughed, a harsh barking sound. Specific. I am his only son, Henderson. Who else would he leave it to? The gardener. Or maybe he glanced at me with a sneer, maybe to the transcriptionist over there. Brandon snorted. Do not be ridiculous, Dad. Grandpa was senile, but he was not crazy. He would not leave a multi-million-dollar empire to someone who buys their clothes at Goodwill. Jasmine opened a notebook, pen poised. Just read it, Mr. Henderson. We have a celebration dinner booked at Le Bernardin tonight, and traffic will be a nightmare. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. He picked up the heavy document, breaking the wax seal with a snap that sounded like a bone breaking. Very well, he said, his eyes hard. I, Henry Davis, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. To my son, Richard. Henderson paused, looking directly at my father. Richard smirked, already reaching for his fountain pen. To my son Richard, who has proven time and again that he values status over substance, I leave the sum of $1. The room went dead silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner sounded like gunshots. $1, Richard repeated, his voice barely a whisper. You mean 1,000,000? $1, Henderson corrected firmly. And his old set of golf clubs. He felt you might need the practice if you ever hope to earn an honest living. Cynthia gasped, clutching her pearls. This is a mistake, a typo. Read it again. It is no mistake, Mrs. Davis. Henderson continued, turning the page. To my grandson Brandon. Brandon sat up straighter, adjusting his tie. Okay, here we go. Skip the lecture, just tell me the number. I leave the sum of $500,000. Henderson read. Brandon pumped his fist, grinning at Jasmine. Yes, that covers the debts. Wait. Henderson held up a hand. I leave the sum of $500,000 to be paid directly to the creditors holding his gambling debts, which I have already purchased. However, this debt forgiveness is conditional. Brandon must complete 2,000 hours of community service at the local soup kitchen within 1 year. Failure to do so will result in the reinstatement of the debt with interest. Brandon's face went gray. Community service? Me. I do not do soup kitchens. And finally Henderson said, his voice softening for the first time as he turned to look at me. To my granddaughter, Nicole, her. Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the table. What does she get? The cat. To Nicole, Henderson read clearly, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the Brookline Manor, the portfolio of investments, and 51% of the voting shares of Davis Construction. She is the new owner. The silence in the library was absolute. Even the ticking clock seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Henderson did not look up from the document. He simply let the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade that had just dropped. $1, Richard repeated, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You are telling me that after 30 years of running this company, I get a single dollar. This is a joke, Henderson. A sick, twisted joke. Where is the real will? There is no other will, Mr. Henderson replied calmly. Your father was quite specific. He felt that since you treated the company as your personal piggy bank, you had already extracted your inheritance in advance. Before Richard could explode, Brandon leaned forward, his hands shaking. Okay, forget him. What about me? You said 500,000. Just give me the check so I can leave. Mr. Henderson turned a page. I did not say I was giving you $500,000, Brandon. I said I was leaving you the sum of the debt. You see, your grandfather purchased your promissory notes from your rather unsavory creditors last month. He paid them off completely. Brandon let out a breath of relief. Oh, thank God. So I am clear. Not exactly. Henderson continued, a thin smile playing on his lips. You now owe that money to the estate. Your grandfather included a clause. The debt will be forgiven only if you complete 2,000 hours of community service at the inner city shelter within the next 12 months. If you fail to complete a single hour, the full amount becomes due immediately with interest. Brandon slumped back in his chair, looking as if he had been punched in the gut. Soup kitchens, for a year. He looked at his hands, soft and manicured, and then at Jasmine, who was staring at the lawyer with wide, terrified eyes. And now to the residuary of the estate, Henderson said, his voice gaining strength. To my granddaughter Nicole, whom I have watched grow into a woman of integrity and resilience, while her family ignored her existence. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew Grandpa loved me, but I never expected what came next. To Nicole, I leave the Brookline estate and all its contents, including the art collection and the jewelry currently in the safe. My mother let out a strangled sound. The jewelry, my grandmother's diamonds. Others. She grabbed Richard's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Do something, Richard. She cannot have the house. That is my house. Henderson raised his voice over her protests. Furthermore, I leave to Nicole the entire investment portfolio held at Vanguard. And finally, the most important asset, 51% of the Class A voting shares of Davis Construction. This grants her controlling interest in the company and the power to appoint or remove the board of directors effective immediately. The air left the room. It wasn't just money, it was power. It was the keys to the kingdom. Richard froze. 51% meant he was no longer the boss. He was an employee, and his boss was the daughter he had just told to take an Uber in the rain. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then Cynthia screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek that shattered the decorum of the room. She stood up so abruptly her heavy chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the floor. "You are lying," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is a typist. She is a nobody. She tricked him. She sat by his bed and poisoned his mind against us. I will not let her take my house. I will not let her touch my diamonds." Jasmine remained seated, but her face had gone pale. As a lawyer, she knew exactly what those words meant. She looked at me for the first time, not with contempt, but with fear. She realized that the girl in the stained shirt now owned the roof over their heads, and the company that paid for their lifestyles. Mr. Henderson closed the folder with a final decisive snap. "It is done, Mrs. Davis. The deed has already been recorded. The shares have been transferred. Nicole is not just the owner of this house. She is your landlord. And Richard, she is now your employer." I looked at my father. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of pure hatred. I met his gaze steadily. "I think you are sitting in my chair, Dad," I said softly. That was the moment the war began. "You ungrateful little brat," Richard roared, the sound tearing through the dignified silence of the library. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of crimson veins bulging in his neck like cords. He did not just stand up, he launched himself. He scrambled over the polished mahogany table, scattering the legal documents and the crystal water pitcher like confetti. His hands shaped into claws, intent on strangling the daughter he had ignored for decades. "Richard, no." Cynthia shrieked, clutching her pearls, terrified, not for my safety, but for the scandal. But he never reached me. Mr. Henderson, wise to the violent temper of his client's son, had anticipated this. 2 large men in dark suits who had been standing silently by the bookshelves blending into the shadows moved with lightning speed. They intercepted my father in midair, grabbing his arms and pinning him back against the oak paneling with practiced efficiency. "Get off me!" Richard screamed, struggling uselessly against their iron grip, kicking out his legs like a petulant child. "She stole my company. That money is mine. She is a thief." I did not flinch. I sat there for a moment, watching the man who had terrified me my entire childhood being restrained like a common criminal. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I slowly stood up, brushing the dried wine stain on my shirt, as if it were a speck of dust. I walked around the table, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor, until I was standing just out of his reach. "Breathe, Richard," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I dropped the dad entirely. "You are going to give yourself a heart attack, and I have not approved the new company insurance premiums yet." "I will kill you," he spat, spittle flying from his lips. "No, you will not," I replied calmly. "What you will do is go home, take a shower, and show up at the office tomorrow morning at 8 sharp. I am bringing in an external audit team. We are going to go through the books, Richard. Every single ledger, every single expense report from the last 5 years. If I find $1 out of place, if I find one personal vacation charged to the company card, you will be fired for cause." Brandon, who had been paralyzed in his chair, suddenly looked like he was about to be sick. He slumped lower, his face gray. He knew exactly what was in those books. Jasmine, however, was not done. She slammed her palms onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot, startling everyone. Her eyes were blazing with the fury of a woman who had just seen her ticket to the high life snatched away. She was not scared like Brandon, she was cornered and she was dangerous. "You are not auditing anything," Jasmine hissed, her voice dripping with venom. She pulled out her phone, already dialing her firm. "You think you have won? You have not won anything yet." She pointed a manicured finger at me, shaking with rage. "I am filing an emergency ex parte motion immediately. We are suing you for undue influence. We will prove that you manipulated a mentally incompetent old man into changing his will. I will freeze every single asset in this estate. I will tie this up in probate court for the next 10 years if I have to." She stepped closer, invading my personal space, her expensive perfume cloying and suffocating. "Mark my words, Nicole, you will not see a single penny. You will not step foot in that company. I will block your access to the accounts before you can even walk out of this door. By the time I am done with you, you will be begging to go back to your little typing job just to afford food." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the desperation behind the threats. "File your motions, Jasmine," I said, picking up my worn leather bag. "But remember, discovery works both ways. When you open up the family finances in court, you open up everything. Are you sure you want me looking into your billable hours too?" I turned and walked toward the door, the sound of my father's cursing and my mother's sobbing following me out into the hall. "See you in court," I whispered to myself. The war had been declared, but they had no idea I had already brought the nuclear codes. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing against the nightstand. It was not an alarm. It was a barrage of notifications from the bank. Alert: account frozen. Alert: transfer declined. Alert: insufficient funds. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and tapped on the banking app. The screen turned red. My checking account, my savings account, and the trust fund account grandfather had just transferred to me were all locked. Balance available $0. I did not panic. I knew exactly who was behind this. I dialed Jasmine's number. She picked up on the first ring, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Good morning, Nicole," Jasmine said, her voice bright and cheerful. "I assume you are calling about your banking issues. You filed an ex parte motion," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You froze the estate assets." Jasmine laughed, a cold, hard sound that grated against my ear. "I told you I would. I am the top real estate attorney in Boston, sweetie. I know every judge in the probate circuit. All I had to do was file a sworn affidavit claiming you used undue influence on a man with dementia. The judge signed the temporary restraining order on the assets an hour ago." "This is illegal, Jasmine," I said. "Grandfather was of sound mind." "You are lying to the court. It is only illegal if you can prove it," she countered. "And right now you cannot even afford a retainer for a junior associate, let alone a lawyer who can go up against me. That is the beauty of the legal system, Nicole. It is not about truth. It is about who can bleed the other person dry first. And I know how to make you starve before the trial even begins." I could hear the clinking of silverware in the background. She was probably eating a breakfast paid for by the company credit card I now technically owned. "I am giving you a chance, Jasmine," I said. "Withdraw the motion. If you do not, things are going to get very ugly for you." She sighed as if she were explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "You really do not get it, do you? You are a transcriptionist. You type words. I manipulate the law. You are out of your league. Enjoy the ramen noodles, Nicole. It is going to be a long winter." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked around my small apartment. She thought she had trapped me. She thought she had cut off my supply line. She had no idea that the frozen accounts were just a decoy. My real money, the salary I earned from the Department of Justice, sat in a secure federal credit union under a different name. But more importantly, Jasmine had just made a fatal error. By filing that motion, she had put her name on a legal document containing a lie. She had just given me the first nail for her coffin. I walked over to my secure laptop and opened a new file. Subject: Jasmine Davis. Charge: perjury and filing false instruments. I started typing. The Uber dropped me off at the service gate because the keypad code for the main entrance had already been changed. I walked the quarter-mile up the winding driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots in the damp evening air. The guest house, a converted carriage house on the edge of the property, had been my sanctuary for the last 3 years. It was small and drafty, but it was mine. Or at least it was supposed to be. I reached the front door exhausted and emotionally drained, ready to collapse into my bed. I pulled out my keyring and slid the silver key into the lock. It stopped halfway. I frowned and tried again, jiggling it slightly. It would not turn. I stepped back and looked closer. The deadbolt was brand new. The brass was shiny and scratched, devoid of the patina that had been there this morning. They had changed the locks. A sinking feeling hit my stomach, not of fear but of violation. I turned around, scanning the property, and that was when I saw it. In the middle of the perfectly manicured lawn, beneath the spreading branches of the old oak tree, lay a pile of sodden fabric and cardboard. I ran over, my heart pounding. It was my life. My clothes were heaped in a tangled, wet mess. My books were splayed open, their pages swollen and ruined by the damp ground. A box of personal mementos, things that had no monetary value but meant everything to me, had been dumped upside down. I saw the ceramic mug Grandpa had given me for my high school graduation shattered into 3 pieces. I saw the framed photograph of us fishing in Maine, the glass cracked and the image waterlogged. Well, look who finally decided to show up. The voice drifted down from above. I looked up. My mother, Cynthia, was standing on the balcony of the main house, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, holding a glass of white wine. She looked down at me with the detached interest of someone watching a stray dog rummage through trash. "Unlock the door, Mother," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "That is my home. My laptop is in there. My server is in there." "Not anymore," she replied, taking a slow sip of her wine. "Jasmine called. She told me about the court order. The ownership of this entire estate is currently under dispute. That means the status quo must be maintained. And the status quo, Nicole, is that this is my house and I do not want strangers living on my property." "You cannot do this," I shouted, gesturing to the ruined pile on the grass. "You threw my things out like garbage. It is going to rain again tonight." "Then I suggest you start packing," she said, leaning against the railing. "I have already called security. If you are not off the premises in 10 minutes, they will escort you out for trespassing. You are not a resident here, Nicole. You are a squatter." She turned her back to me and walked back inside, sliding the glass door shut. I stood there alone in the gathering dark. I looked at the shattered mug and the ruined photo. I wanted to cry. I wanted to pick up a rock and smash the balcony window. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of rain and betrayal. I knelt down and dug through the pile, finding my backup hard drives, which I had luckily kept in a waterproof case. I shoved them into my bag. I left the clothes. I left the broken glass. I left everything that tied me to this toxic place. I stood up and looked at the main house one last time. She thought she had made me homeless. She thought she had stripped me of my dignity. But all she had done was sever the last thread of mercy I had for her. I turned and walked back toward the gate, leaving the wreckage of my past on the lawn. I was done being the victim. It was time to become the hunter. The apartment I found was a 4th-floor walk-up in Dorchester, a neighborhood my mother would not drive through even in an armored car. The paint was peeling in long gray strips like dead skin, and the radiator hissed and clanked with the rhythm of a dying engine. To the outside world, it looked like rock bottom. To me, it was a fortress. The walls were thick enough to block Wi-Fi signals, which was perfect for the encrypted satellite server I was currently setting up on the scratched laminate kitchen table. I had just finished connecting the hard drive containing the evidence of my father's embezzlement when my phone rang. The screen displayed Richard's name. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I knew that answering would give him a false sense of security. I swiped accept and put it on speaker while I continued to type code. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice flat and tired, just the way he wanted to hear it. "I heard you moved to the slums," my father said without preamble. His voice was rich with satisfaction, the sound of a man who had just won a bet. A friend of mine owns a building near there. He told me he saw a girl looking like a drowned rat dragging cheap luggage up the stairs. I told him it could not be my daughter, because my daughter knows her place. But I guess I was wrong. It is temporary, I lied, typing a command that bypassed his corporate firewalls. It does not have to be, he purred. Look, Nicole, I am not a monster. I am your father. I am willing to offer you a lifeline. Come back to the house. Apologize to your mother for the scene you caused. Get on your knees and beg for her forgiveness. If you do that, and if you sign a document relinquishing your claim to the grandfather's estate, I will give you an allowance. I stopped typing. An allowance. $500 a month, he said benevolently. It is generous considering your situation. That little typing job of yours cannot possibly pay the rent on that rat hole. What do you get paid? A penny a word. You will freeze to death before winter is over, Nicole. Swallow your pride. Come home and learn to be a dutiful daughter. I looked around the dingy apartment. He saw poverty. I saw a tactical command center. He thought I was scraping by on transcription fees. He did not know that my federal salary was currently being deposited into a secure offshore account, and that I had enough liquidity to buy his country club membership twice over. Keep your money, Richard, I said calmly. You are going to need it for legal fees. He laughed, a harsh barking sound. You are delusional. You are going to starve Nicole. And when you come crawling back crying and hungry, I am going to shut the door in your face just to teach you a lesson. He hung up. The line went dead. I looked at the phone and then back at my screen. A green progress bar appeared indicating that the download of his personal tax returns was complete. They thought I was destitute. They thought I was weak. They believed the lie so completely that they had stopped guarding their flank. I went to the fridge and opened a bottle of sparkling water. I was not starving. I was feasting on their stupidity. The trap was set, and Richard had just walked right into it. The next morning, the cruelty escalated from financial to physical. I was sitting at my makeshift desk analyzing a series of shell company transactions when a notification popped up on my phone. It was not a text or a bank alert. It was an automated message from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Your coverage under Davis Construction Group Plan has been terminated effective immediately. Reason: employee termination. I stared at the screen. I had been on the company plan since I was 21, listed as a dependent and later as a consultant. It was the one thing grandfather had insisted on ensuring I always had access to the best doctors. Richard knew I had asthma. He knew I had a history of expensive prescriptions. Removing my access to health care was not a business decision. It was an act of biological warfare. 30 seconds later, the email arrived. The subject line was simply, "Good luck." I opened it. My father's typing was aggressive, the font large and bold. Nicole. As the CEO, I have reviewed our benefits packages. We can no longer support non-essential personnel on the company dime. Premium healthcare is a privilege for those who contribute to the family legacy. Since you have chosen to be an adversary, you are on your own. I hope you do not get sick. I hear a single ambulance ride can cost $3,000. Try not to break a leg walking up the stairs to your slum apartment. Dad. He was trying to scare me. He wanted me to imagine a future where a single accident would bankrupt me, where I would be forced to crawl back to him begging for insulin or antibiotics. He wanted me to feel the crushing weight of the American medical system pressing down on my chest. I leaned back in my creaky chair and started to laugh. It was a dry, humorless laugh, but it was real. Richard thought he had just cut my lifeline. He had no idea that for the last 5 years I had been covered under the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program. My position with the Department of Justice came with platinum tier coverage, the kind senators and federal judges used. I had 0 deductibles and access to any specialist in the country. My health was safer than his company's stock price, but I did not tell him that. If he knew I was safe, he would stop escalating. and I needed him to escalate. I needed him to prove that he was using his corporate power to retaliate against a shareholder. I hit reply, keeping my response short and pathetic just the way he liked it. Richard, please, I have prescriptions to fill. This is dangerous. Are you saying I am fired? His response was immediate. You were never hired. You are nothing. Figure it out. I smiled and captured a screenshot of the exchange. I opened my digital case file and dragged the image into a folder labeled Evidence of Malice. He had just admitted in writing to terminating a shareholder's benefits out of spite without board approval. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about the cost of living. Instead, he had just handed me another weapon to destroy his career. I took a sip of my coffee and went back to work. I was feeling perfectly healthy. The attacks did not stop with money or medicine. Later that afternoon, my phone began to buzz with a different kind of notification. It was not the rhythmic ping of emails, but the relentless vibration of social media tagging. I picked up the device and saw that my mother had decided to take our private war public. Cynthia had posted a photograph on the Beacon Hill Ladies Society page. It was a private group for the wealthiest women in Boston, a digital country club where reputations were made and destroyed over morning mimosas. The photo showed my mother in her morning weeds, looking devastatingly fragile, clutching a handkerchief to her tear-stained face. The caption was a masterpiece of creative writing. It breaks a mother's heart to share this, she wrote. But I must warn my dear friends. My estranged daughter Nicole has taken advantage of my late father's severe dementia. In his final confused days, she manipulated him into signing away the family home and the company my husband built. We are devastated by this betrayal from a child we tried so hard to love, but greed has poisoned her soul. Please pray for us as we fight to reclaim our legacy. I watched the comments roll in like a tidal wave of sewage. These were women I had known my whole life. Women who had attended my high school graduation. Women whose children I had tutored. How disgusting, wrote the wife of a state senator. I always knew there was something off about that girl. Another woman, the head of the local charity board, added, she should be ashamed to show her face in this city. We stand with you, Cynthia. Then the direct messages started. People I had not spoken to in years were suddenly sliding into my inbox to deliver paragraphs of hate. You are a monster, one message read. I hope you rot in hell for what you did to your parents, read another. Within an hour, I had been uninvited from a wedding, blocked by 3 former college roommates, and effectively exiled from Boston society. I was a pariah. For a moment, the sheer weight of the hatred made it hard to breathe. It is one thing to know your family dislikes you. It is another to have hundreds of strangers judging you based on a lie. My mother knew exactly what she was doing. She was isolating me, cutting off any potential support system, ensuring that when I walked into that courtroom, I would be walking in alone. But then the training kicked in. I took a deep breath and sat up straight. A younger version of me would have deactivated my account and cried in the bathroom. But I was not just a daughter anymore. I was an investigator building a case. I did not reply to the comments. I did not post a defense. Instead, I opened my evidence folder. I took screenshots of the post. I took screenshots of the timestamps. I took screenshots of the lies about my grandfather's dementia, which contradicted his medical records, proving he was lucid until the end. My mother thought she was destroying my reputation. In reality, she was handing me a gift. By publicly spreading falsehoods to influence the perception of a legal case, she was engaging in defamation and potential jury tampering. She was proving malice. She was proving that their lawsuit was not about justice, but about punishment. I saved the last screenshot and closed the app. Keep talking, Mother, I whispered to the empty room. Every word you type is just another year added to your husband's sentence. You want to make me famous. Fine. But you are not going to like the ending of this story. The following morning, the marble lobby of Davis Construction was invaded by a reality my family had tried desperately to ignore. 2 men in ill-fitting leather jackets, walked past the security desk, ignoring the protests of the receptionist. They were not clients. They were collection agents for the kind of people who did not use lawyers to settle disputes. They marched straight to the elevators and hit the button for the executive suite. Upstairs in the corner office, Brandon was sweating through his silk shirt. He paced back and forth, his hands shaking as he poured himself a drink at 10 in the morning. "Dad, they are downstairs," Brandon hissed, his voice cracking with panic. "You have to help me. If I do not pay them today, they are going to break my legs. Or worse. You know what these people do." Richard sat behind his massive oak desk, looking gray and aged. He rubbed his temples, trying to think. The company accounts were under scrutiny because of my threat of an audit, but he was still the CEO. He still had the tokens. "How much?" Brandon Richard asked, his voice weary. 200,000, Brandon whispered. The interest compounded. Richard slammed his fist on the desk. 200,000. Do you have any idea how hard that is to hide right now? Nicole is watching like a hawk. "Dad, please," Brandon begged, falling to his knees. "It is my life. Just do it. Transfer it to the Shell vendor account. Label it as structural steel procurement. We do it all the time. Just this once more. I promise I will never gamble again." Richard looked at his son, the golden child who had turned into an albatross around his neck. He looked at the door, expecting the thugs to burst in any second. He made his choice. He pulled his keyboard closer and logged into the corporate treasury portal. He bypassed the dual authorization protocol, using an override code only the CEO possessed. This is the last time, he growled, typing in the numbers. Structural steel invoice number 749, $200,000. Authorize. He hit enter. The screen flashed green. Transaction complete. Brandon collapsed onto the carpet, sobbing with relief. "Thank you, Dad. You saved me." Across the city, in my dim apartment, a red light started flashing on my monitor. It was followed by a shrill alarm that cut through the silence. I spun around in my chair and maximized the window. Alert. Suspicious activity detected. Large withdrawal to unverified vendor. I leaned in, watching the data stream in real time. I saw the amount. $200,000. I saw the IP address. It came directly from the CEO's terminal, and I saw the justification. Structural steel. I quickly cross-referenced the vendor ID with the database I had built. The company did not exist. It was a ghost entity registered to a P.O. box in Revere. My heart raced, not with fear, but with adrenaline. Richard had just crossed the line from mismanagement to felony embezzlement. He had done it while the company was technically in probate dispute, which added a layer of federal wire fraud to the mix. I could have stopped it. I had the admin privileges to freeze the transfer. I hovered my mouse over the cancel transaction button. My finger twitched. If I stopped it, I saved the company money, but if I let it go, I had the smoking gun that would put Richard in prison for 10 years. I moved my hand away from the mouse. "Go ahead, Dad," I whispered to the screen. Take it. Take it all." I hit the record button instead, capturing every packet of data, every keystroke, every digital fingerprint of the crime. The transfer cleared, the money was gone, and my case was finally airtight. I saved the file and leaned back. The trap had snapped shut, and they did not even feel the pain yet. The knock on my door was not a request. It was a demand. 3 sharp raps followed by a pause, and then 3 more. I checked the peephole and sighed. It was Cynthia. She was wearing a trench coat and oversized sunglasses, trying to look inconspicuous in a neighborhood she clearly thought was contagious. I opened the door, but I did not step aside. "What do you want, Mother?" Cynthia pushed past me, wrinkling her nose at the smell of old cooking oil that permeated the hallway. She looked around my sparse apartment, taking in the peeling paint and the mismatched furniture, with a look of vindicated pity. "I brought the papers, Nicole," she said, pulling a thick envelope from her designer bag. "Jasmine drafted them this morning. It is a settlement agreement. You sign over the voting shares and the house, and we will drop the lawsuit. Your father is even willing to let you keep the jewelry. Consider it a parting gift." She tossed the envelope onto the kitchen table right on top of the stack of forensic spreadsheets I had been analyzing. The force of her throw caused the papers to slide, fanning out across the surface. I walked over and picked up the envelope. "I am not signing anything." Cynthia rolled her eyes. "Do not be stubborn. Look at this place. You are living in squalor. We are offering you a way out." Her eyes drifted down to the table. She frowned, looking at the complex charts and highlighted bank routing numbers on the documents I had been working on. These were not transcription logs. They were detailed flowcharts of money laundering schemes involving shell companies in Panama. "What is this?" she asked, reaching out. I moved too late. She snatched a sheet of paper, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers. It was a list of offshore transactions linked to a pseudonym my father used. "Myers Global Holdings," she read aloud. $2 million. "What is this? Why do you have bank records with these amounts?" She looked up at me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You are forging documents, aren't you? That is how you are planning to win. You are creating fake evidence to frame your father." "Give that back," I said, stepping forward and snatching the paper from her hand. "Do not touch my work. You do not understand what you are looking at." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she hissed. "You are a criminal. You are sitting here in this dump manufacturing lies. I knew you were desperate, but I did not think you were stupid enough to leave the evidence lying around." She lunged for the table again, grabbing a handful of papers. I let her. In fact, I stepped back. Among the papers she grabbed was a dummy file I had planted intentionally labeled Project Clean Sweep Confidential, but underneath that was a small portable hard drive I had left out. She grabbed that too. "I am taking this," she announced, shoving the hard drive and the papers into her bag. "I am taking this to the judge. Let us see how your little forgery scheme holds up in court." "Mother's wait," I said, feigning panic. "You cannot take that. That is private property." "Watch me," she said, smiling for the first time in weeks. She turned and marched out the door, her heels clacking on the linoleum. She thought she had just seized the weapon that would destroy me. She had no idea she had just stolen a federal tracking device and the very evidence that would implicate her as an accomplice to obstruction of justice. I closed the door and locked it. I waited 10 seconds, then I walked over to the window and watched her get into her car. I picked up my phone and dialed my supervisor. "Subject has retrieved the bait," I said. "The tracker is live. We now have a direct link between the suspect and the evidence." I hung up. "Thanks, Mom. You just made my job so much easier." The argument about the papers had left the air in the small apartment thick with tension. I could see my mother's chest heaving beneath her trench coat, her eyes darting around the room looking for more ammunition to use against me. She had the financial documents in her hand, but she looked unsatisfied, as if she knew they were not the smoking gun she needed. "I need a glass of water," I said, feigning a moment of weakness. I pressed a hand to my forehead, letting my shoulders slump. "Please, just give me a minute to think about your offer, Mother. I am feeling dizzy." I turned my back to her and walked into the tiny kitchenette, which was separated from the living area by a half wall. I ran the tap loudly, letting the water splash into the sink. In the reflection of the microwave door, I watched her. Cynthia did not wait. The moment my back was turned, she moved toward the desk with the speed of a viper. Her eyes locked onto the small black rectangle sitting next to my server. It was a portable hard drive labeled with a strip of red tape that read, "Confidential, do not open," in bold black letters. I saw her hesitate for a fraction of a second. She looked toward the kitchen, checking to make sure I was still occupied. Then, with a fluid, practiced motion, she snatched the hard drive and dropped it into the depths of her open Hermes Birkin bag. She adjusted her coat, smoothing the fabric over the bulge, ensuring her theft was invisible. When I returned with the glass of water, she was standing by the door looking composed and triumphantly smug. The desperation from earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory smile. She believed she had just stolen my digital diary, my stash of illegal records, the leverage she needed to blackmail me into submission. You know, Nicole, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I think you should take some time to really consider your position. We do not want to destroy you. We just want what is rightfully ours. But if you force our hand, we will use everything we have against you. She patted her bag gently, a subconscious tell that she had secured the prize. I will think about it, I said, keeping my voice trembling. Please, just go. She nodded, her smile widening. Smart girl. Do not take too long. We will see you in court. She turned and swept out of the apartment, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. I listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway. I waited until I heard the distant slam of the building's front door before I moved. I walked over to the desk and looked at the empty spot where the hard drive had been. I did not panic. I did not call the police. Instead, I smiled. That hard drive did not contain my personal files. It contained a mirror copy of the encrypted ledger I had extracted from Richard's computer, along with a hidden executable file that would activate the moment anyone tried to crack the password. It would broadcast the GPS location of the device and log every attempt to access the data. My mother thought she had stolen a weapon to use against me. In reality, she had just walked out of my apartment carrying a federal tracking beacon and the very evidence that would link her directly to the conspiracy. I took a sip of water. It tasted sweet. The bait had been taken. Now all I had to do was wait for them to hang themselves. The JFK Federal Building in downtown Boston loomed against the gray sky, a slab of concrete and glass that screamed authority. I pulled my beat-up sedan into the underground parking garage, bypassing the visitor lane, and heading straight for the secure level reserved for clearance holders. The guard at the gate, a young man who looked bored, saw my car and started to wave me toward the exit. Then I held up my badge. The platinum shield caught the fluorescent light. His eyes went wide. He snapped a salute and opened the barrier without a word. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. I walked through the metal detectors, bypassing the line of civilians. I took the elevator to the 23rd floor, the one that did not exist on the building directory. The doors opened to a hive of activity. Analysts were glued to screens, agents were barking into phones, and the air hummed with the tension of national security. I walked straight to the corner office. Assistant Director Thorne was waiting for me. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He was reviewing a file when I entered, but he closed it immediately. Agent Davis, he said, his voice gruff but respectful. You look tired. I assume the undercover work is taking a toll. I sat down, smoothing my skirt. It is almost over, sir. The target has taken the bait. Thorne leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. Let us talk about Richard Construction. We have been building this RICO case for 2 years, Nicole. Money laundering, wire fraud, embezzlement. We have the financial records, but we need the link. We need to prove intent. We need to prove that the family was knowingly moving the money, not just the accountants. I nodded. I know. And as of an hour ago, we have that link. I pulled out my secure tablet and placed it on his desk. I tapped the screen, bringing up a map of Boston. A bright red dot was pulsing steadily, moving west along the highway toward the wealthy suburbs. That is the tracking beacon embedded in a portable hard drive, I said, pointing to the dot. It contains a cloned copy of the Cayman Island ledgers. It is password protected, but the moment someone tries to crack it, the drive will log the IP address and take a photo of the user via their webcam. And who has this drive? Thorne asked, raising an eyebrow. My mother, I replied without hesitation. Cynthia Davis. She stole it from my apartment, thinking it was evidence of my own crimes. She plans to use it to blackmail me or present it in probate court to prove I am unfit to inherit. Thorne let out a low whistle. She stole classified federal evidence. That makes her an accessory. It makes her a mule, I corrected. She is transporting the smoking gun right back to the crime scene. Once she gives that drive to my father or their lawyers, they will try to open it. And when they do, they will confirm they have possession of the stolen data. We will have them on possession of stolen government property, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Thorne looked at the map again. The red dot had stopped moving. It was hovering right over the address of the Davis family estate. "You are ruthless, Nicole," he said. But there was admiration in his tone. "You set up your own mother. She made her choice, sir," I said, standing up. "She chose the money over her daughter. Now she has to live with the consequences." Thorne nodded. "Keep the surveillance live. We will prepare the warrant. If that drive is opened, we move in." I walked out of the office feeling lighter than I had in years. The trap was not just set. The prey had already swallowed the hook. Now all I had to do was reel them in. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of the Prudential Tower felt like an ascent into a different world. This was Jasmine's domain. The law firm was a fortress of glass and steel designed to intimidate anyone who couldn't afford $400 an hour. I walked past the receptionist, who looked at my attire with a familiar sneer, and was ushered into a corner conference room that offered a panoramic view of the city I was about to turn upside down. Jasmine sat at the head of a long marble table. She was flanked by Brandon, who was playing a game on his phone, his feet resting on an empty leather chair. They did not stand up when I entered. They simply watched me walk the length of the room, trying to make me feel small. "Sit down," Jasmine said, gesturing to a metal chair that looked deliberately uncomfortable. "We do not have much time. I have a partners meeting in 20 minutes and I want this wrapped up." I remained standing. "I am not here to chat, Jasmine. You said you had a proposal." She slid a thick document across the polished marble. It stopped perfectly at the edge of the table right in front of me. "We are feeling generous," she said, clasping her hands. "Your mother is very upset about the hard drive she found. She is convinced you are involved in something dangerous, but because we are family, we have decided to offer you a way out." I looked down at the paper. It was a settlement agreement. "Here are the terms." Jasmine continued, her voice smooth and practiced. "You will sign over full control of the voting shares to Richard immediately. You will vacate the guest house and renounce any claim to the Brookline estate. You will also sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from ever discussing family business with third parties." And in exchange, I asked, my voice neutral. In exchange, Jasmine smiled, showing perfectly whitened teeth. "We will give you a one-time cash payment of $50,000, and we will agree not to turn that hard drive over to the police." Brandon laughed, setting his phone down. 50 grand, Nicole. Do you have any idea how many words you would have to type to earn that? It is a fortune for someone like you. You could buy a whole new wardrobe. You could finally buy some clothes that do not look like they came from a dumpster. Take it. It is enough to buy you a lifetime of polyester suits." I looked at the document. $50,000. It was an insult. It was barely enough to cover a year of rent in this city. But more importantly, it was a bribe to cover up their own crimes. I picked up the document, feeling the weight of the expensive bond paper. I looked at Jasmine, who was checking her watch, and at Brandon, who was smirking like a child who had just stolen candy. "You really think this is about money, don't you?" I said softly. "It is always about money," Jasmine replied. "Sign it, Nicole, or I will ruin you." I held the document up. The sunlight from the window caught the watermark. "You are right about one thing, Jasmine," I said. "This is going to end soon." I ripped the paper in half. The sound was loud and violent in the quiet room. I ripped it again and again until the settlement offer was nothing but confetti. I let the pieces fall onto the marble table. "I do not want your crumbs," I said, my voice hard. "And I do not want your mercy. Keep the $50,000. You are going to need it for the commissary." Brandon sat up, his smirk vanishing. "What did you just say?" I turned and walked toward the glass doors. "You heard me. I will see you in court. And Jasmine, bring your toothbrush. You might not be going home after the trial." 2 days later, I walked into the deposition room at Jasmine's firm. The air conditioning was set to Arctic, and a court reporter sat in the corner ready to transcribe every word. My family was lined up on one side of the table, looking like a firing squad. Jasmine sat at the head, her notepad filled with questions designed to humiliate me. I took my seat alone. I did not have a lawyer present because I did not need one. I placed a single thick file folder on the table. "Raise your right hand," the court reporter said. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," I said, my voice steady. Jasmine didn't waste time. She clicked her pen and leaned forward. "State your name and occupation for the record." "Nicole Davis," I said. "Government consultant." Jasmine laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Consultant. That is a vague term, Nicole. Let us be specific. You are a transcriptionist, correct? You type audio files for a living. I work with data I corrected." "Let us look at your finances," Jasmine said, sliding a subpoena across the table. "We requested your tax returns for the last 3 years to prove that you lack the financial literacy to manage a multi-million-dollar estate. You provided this." She held up the document I had submitted. It was a standard IRS 1040 form, but 90% of it was covered in thick black redaction bars. The only things visible were my name and the filing status. "This is a joke," Jasmine scoffed, tossing the paper back at me. "You redacted the income lines. You redacted the employer identification numbers. What are you hiding, Nicole? Are you ashamed that your annual income is below the poverty line?" I leaned back in my chair. "I redacted those lines because they are classified, Jasmine. My income is derived from federal contracts that fall under the National Security Act. I am not at liberty to disclose the sources or the amounts in a civil proceeding without a court order from a federal judge." Brandon burst out laughing. "National security. Listen to her. She thinks she is James Bond. She probably types up reports for the DMV and calls it classified." Jasmine smirked, silencing him with a wave of her hand. "We are not playing games here, Nicole. Refusing to disclose your income goes to the heart of our argument. If you cannot prove you have the means to support yourself, we can argue that you manipulated Henry because you were desperate for money. So I will ask you again, how much did you make last year? Was it 30,000? 20. I looked her dead in the eye. "I made enough to buy this law firm, Jasmine. But since you are so obsessed with numbers, let us move on to your client's finances. I believe it is my turn to ask questions." Jasmine frowned. "That is not how this works. I am asking the questions." "Actually," I said, sliding the folder I brought across the table. "Under the rules of discovery, I am allowed to cross-examine the plaintiffs regarding their financial standing to establish motive for the lawsuit. And I have a few questions for Richard about his offshore accounts." The room went silent. Richard shifted in his seat, his face paling. Jasmine looked at the folder, then at me. For the first time, the arrogance slipped and I saw a flicker of doubt. She realized too late that she wasn't the one hunting, she was the one being cornered. Jasmine looked as though she had swallowed a lemon, but she nodded at Richard, indicating he should answer. My father adjusted his silk tie and leaned into the microphone, looking every inch the aggrieved patriarch. He believed this was a formality. He believed I was bluffing. He did not know that I had the digital receipts for every transaction he had made in the last decade. "Mr. Davis," I said, looking down at a document I had deliberately left blank. "Let us discuss the company's liquidity. As the CEO, you are responsible for authorizing all payments over $50,000, correct?" Richard sighed, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling. "Yes, Nicole. That is how a corporation works. I sign off on the big picture. I do not concern myself with the price of paperclips." I turned a page in my notebook. "Then let us talk about the big picture. Specifically, a wire transfer authorized last Tuesday at 10:14 in the morning. The amount was $200,000. The recipient was a vendor listed as North Star Solutions." The room went very quiet. I saw Brandon flinch in the corner. His legs started bouncing nervously under the table. Richard froze. His eyes darted quickly to Jasmine, then back to me. He licked his lips. I authorize hundreds of transfers a week, he said, his voice slightly higher than before. I cannot possibly recall every single one without the ledger in front of me. I anticipated that I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a printout of the transaction log. Here is the transfer. It was flagged as urgent. The justification code used was structural steel procurement. But when I cross-referenced the vendor ID, North Star Solutions does not sell steel. In fact, they do not seem to sell anything. They are registered to a residential address in a neighborhood known for illegal gambling operations. Jasmine sat up straight, snatching the paper from in front of Richard. She scanned it, her face darkening. She looked at her client, waiting for an explanation. Richard slammed his hand on the table, trying to regain control through volume. This is harassment. You are phishing, Nicole. North Star is a consultant. A specialized logistics consultant. A consultant, I repeated, keeping my voice even. So you are testifying under oath that this $200,000 was for legitimate business consulting services, not for, say, paying off a personal debt for a family member. Richard glared at me, hatred radiating from him in waves. He knew I knew. But he also knew that if he admitted to embezzlement right now, he would lose everything. He chose to double down. It was for consulting, he lied, his eyes locked on mine. Critical strategic consulting. It was a necessary business expense. And you verified the work product yourself, I asked, giving him one last chance to recant. Yes, I did, he snapped. Every dollar was accounted for. I looked down at my notebook. I picked up my pen and wrote a single word in block letters. Perjury. Thank you, Mr. Davis, I said, closing the folder. I have no further questions regarding this transaction. Jasmine looked at me with narrowed eyes. She was a shark, and she sensed blood in the water. She knew her client was lying. She just did not understand why I had let him get away with it so easily. She did not realize that I did not need him to break down and confess. I just needed him to lie on the record. Once the lie was transcribed by the court reporter, it became a felony. Richard had just walked into the trap and locked the door behind himself. The mood in the Davis library was frantic. Richard had retreated to his study with a bottle of scotch shaking from the deposition, but Cynthia and Brandon were huddled around the Stoll hard drive like witches around a cauldron. Brandon had connected the device to his laptop, but a red dialog box barred their entry. Password required. Try her birthday. Cynthia snapped her nails, tapping impatiently on the mahogany table. Try the dog's name. Try anything, Brandon. I tried everything, Mom. Brandon groaned, running a hand through his hair. I tried her birthday, Grandpa's birthday, even the date she graduated. It is military-grade encryption. We are not getting in without a key. Cynthia paced the room, her heels sinking into the Persian rug. We need to see what is on there. She was so protective of it. She panicked when I took it. That means it holds the leverage we need to crush her. Call that friend of yours, the one who fixed your grades in college. Brandon hesitated. You mean Kevin? He is expensive, Mom. And he is not exactly legal. I do not care about legal. Cynthia hissed. I care about winning. Get him over here, now. An hour later, a young man in a hoodie sat in grandfather's leather chair, typing furiously. Kevin did not ask questions. He just accepted the envelope of cash Cynthia slid across the desk and went to work. The room was silent save for the clicking of keys. I watched from the hidden camera feed on my own laptop miles away as the Trojan horse I had planted lowered its defenses. I had programmed the drive to simulate a difficult hack before eventually yielding. I wanted them to feel like they had earned it. Got it, Kevin muttered, hitting the enter key with a flourish. The red box vanished, replaced by a cascading list of files. Cynthia pushed Kevin aside and leaned in, her eyes widening as she clicked on the first folder labeled Financial Records 2020 to 2024. A spreadsheet opened, filling the screen with rows of numbers. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell companies in Panama and the Cayman Islands. The totals at the bottom of the columns were staggering: 5 million, $10 million, $20 million. Oh my God, Brandon whispered, his face pale. Look at these amounts. Nicole isn't broke, she is loaded. She is not just loaded, Cynthia said, a manic grin spreading across her face. She is a criminal. Look at these routing numbers, Brandon. This is money laundering. Classic layering and integration. She has been using her little government consulting gig as a cover to wash dirty money. Cynthia began to laugh, a high-pitched sound of pure vindication. She pointed at the screen, her finger trembling with excitement. "We have her," she crowed. "We finally have her. This is why she redacted her tax returns. This is why she lives in a dump. She is hiding a fortune in illegal assets. If we turn this over to the federal prosecutor, she goes to prison for 20 years. But Mom, Brandon asked, frowning. Why would she keep the records on a portable drive labeled confidential? Because she is arrogant, Cynthia declared, slamming the laptop shut. She thought she was smarter than us. She thought we would never look. She grabbed the hard drive, clutching it to her chest like a holy relic. Go tell your father. Tell him to stop drinking. We do not need to settle. We do not need to negotiate. We are going to blackmail her into signing over everything. And if she refuses, we will send her to jail. I watched them celebrate on my screen, sipping my tea. They were so blinded by greed they did not realize they were looking at their own family's financial grave. The numbers on that screen were indeed evidence of money laundering, but they weren't mine. They were Richard's. And Cynthia had just fingerprinted herself all over the smoking gun. The cork popped on a vintage bottle of Dom Perignon, echoing through the high ceilings of the Davis living room like a gunshot. But this time nobody flinched. Richard filled the crystal flutes to the brim, his hands steady for the first time in weeks. The fear that had haunted him during the deposition was gone, replaced by the flushed arrogance of a man who believed he had just cheated death. To family, Richard bellowed, raising his glass. And to the end of the ungrateful rat who tried to destroy us. Hear, hear, Brandon cheered, clinking his glass against his father's so hard wine sloshed onto the table. Mom, you are a genius. A literal genius. Stealing that drive was the best thing you have ever done. Cynthia preened on the sofa, the hard drive sitting on the coffee table in front of her like a trophy. She ran her fingers over the casing, smiling a cruel, twisted smile. I told you she was hiding something. All that talk about national security and classified contracts, it was all a cover. She is nothing but a common money launderer. Jasmine sat in the armchair reviewing the printed spreadsheets Kevin the hacker had generated. She shook her head in mock disbelief. The scale of this is massive. Look at these transfers. $5 million moved through a shell company in Panama last May. $3 million to the Caymans in June. She has been busy. Richard leaned over, looking at the numbers. He squinted slightly. The figures looked vaguely familiar to him, but the scotch and the euphoria clouded his judgment. He saw what he wanted to see. He saw his daughter's guilt, not the reflection of his own crimes. She must have been skimming from her clients, Richard said, dismissing the nagging sense of déjà vu. Or maybe she is working for a cartel. It does not matter. The point is, we have proof. So what is the play? Jasmine, Brandon asked, munching on a canapé. Do we blackmail her? Jasmine laughed, a cold, sharp sound. Blackmail is for amateurs, Brandon. No, we are going to destroy her. Tomorrow morning I am going to walk into court and present this to Judge Patterson. I will file a motion to dismiss her claim to the estate based on the fact that she is engaged in criminal enterprise. And then I am going to hand this drive over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Cynthia clapped her hands together delightedly. Oh, I cannot wait to see her face when the police drag her away. Do you think they will let me visit her in prison? I would love to bring her some transcription work to do in her cell. They laughed again, a collective sound of malice that filled the room. They were so drunk on their own narrative that they failed to notice the obvious. They failed to notice that the account numbers on the spreadsheet matched the ones in Richard's locked desk drawer. They failed to notice that the dates of the transfers coincided perfectly with the company's losses over the last 5 years. I watched them from my remote feed, sipping a glass of tap water. It was the most satisfying show I had ever seen. They were currently planning to walk into a federal court and hand the judge a signed confession of their own embezzlement, thinking it was my death warrant. Richard was toasting to his own indictment. Jasmine was drafting the legal arguments that would get her disbarred. And Cynthia was fantasizing about a prison cell that she herself would likely occupy. "Drink up, family," I whispered to the screen. "Enjoy the champagne. It is the last expensive bottle you will be drinking for a very long time." I sent Jasmine a text message asking to meet at a neutral location away from my parents and their hysteria. I chose a quiet coffee shop near the wharf, a place where the tourists outnumbered the locals, hoping to avoid a scene. To my surprise, she actually showed up. She walked in 10 minutes late wearing a sharp navy suit and carrying her briefcase like a weapon. She did not order anything. She simply sat down opposite me, placing her expensive sunglasses on the table with a clatter. "I assume you are here to surrender," Jasmine said, leaning back and crossing her arms. "Smart move. Your mother is currently debating whether to call the FBI or the tabloids first. If you sign the waiver today, I might be able to convince her to keep your little money laundering scheme quiet." I took a sip of my black coffee. "I am not here to surrender, Jasmine. I am here to give you a lifeboat." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. "A lifeboat? From you? The transcriptionist who lives in a walk-up. This should be good." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low and intense. "Listen to me very carefully. You are a lawyer. You have a license to practice. You have a reputation. Right now you are blindly following my father off a cliff. You think that hard drive is a weapon, but it is actually a bomb. And if you walk into court tomorrow and present it as evidence, you will be the one holding it when it explodes." Jasmine scoffed, picking up her sunglasses. "You are bluffing." "We saw the files, Nicole. We saw the offshore accounts. You saw what I wanted you to see," I said, cutting her off. "Rewrote those account numbers, Jasmine. Check the IP addresses. If you file that motion tomorrow, you are suborning perjury. You are introducing stolen federal property into a civil record. You will be disbarred. Your career will be over before lunch." I stared at her, trying to communicate the severity of her mistake without breaking my cover. "Withdraw the lawsuit, Jasmine. Tell Richard to settle. Walk away while you still can." Jasmine stared at me for a long moment. For a second, I thought she might actually listen. I thought the logic might penetrate her greed. But then her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly contempt. She reached out and grabbed her glass of ice water. With a quick, vicious motion, she splashed the entire contents into my face. The cold water hit me like a slap, shocking my system. It dripped down my nose and chin, soaking into the collar of my blouse. The cafe went silent. People turned to stare. "Are you threatening me?" Jasmine hissed, standing up and looming over me. "You pathetic little fraud. Who do you think you are talking to? I am a partner at a top firm. You are a nobody who types for pennies." She grabbed her bag, her voice rising to a shout. "You say I will be disbarred. I would love to see you try." "Oh wait, I forgot. You do not have a law degree. You do not have anything. You are just a jealous broke girl trying to scare the big bad wolf." She threw a napkin at my wet face. "See you in court, Nicole. Wear something dry. The judge hates a mess." She stormed out, leaving me dripping wet in the middle of the cafe. I picked up the napkin and calmly wiped my face. I did not feel humiliated. I felt a cold, absolute certainty. I had given her a chance. I had offered her mercy. And she had just thrown water in the face of the only person who could have saved her. I checked my watch. Less than 24 hours remained. It was time to end this. The city of Boston slept under a blanket of cold mist, but in the VIP section of the Grand Havana room, the lights were blazing and the champagne was flowing. Richard sat on a plush leather sofa, a Cuban cigar clamped between his teeth, and a bottle of crystal sitting in an ice bucket at his knees. He looked around the private club, surveying the other patrons with the smug satisfaction of a king who had just crushed a rebellion. The bill for the night was already over $5,000, but he did not care. In his mind, the Davis estate was already his again. Brandon sat opposite him, scrolling through his phone with manic energy. He turned the screen to show his father a picture of a sleek silver sports car. "It is a McLaren 720S. Dad," Brandon said, his eyes wide and glassy. "The dealership in Norwood just got it in. I put down a deposit, just 10 grand to hold it until the funds clear tomorrow." Richard laughed, clapping his son on the shoulder. "Good choice. Why not? You deserve it. You have had a stressful week." "But the price," Brandon hesitated for a second. "It is 300,000. Pocket change," Richard declared, waving his hand dismissively. "Once Jasmine gets that motion granted, we will have access to the full trust. Nicole is going to lose everything. We will liquidate her assets to pay for legal fees, and frankly, she owes us this. Consider the car a tax on her stupidity." They clinked glasses, the crystal ringing out a sharp, clear note. "To the McLaren," Richard toasted, "and to Nicole, the best investment we ever made." Across the city, the atmosphere was very different. My apartment was pitch black, save for the blue glow of 3 monitors. There was no music, there was no alcohol. There was only the hum of my server and the rhythmic blinking of the encryption software finalizing the evidence package. I sat in the dark, watching the progress bar hit 100%. The file name "Clean Sweep" was highlighted in green. It contained everything: the wire transfers, the forged invoices, the metadata from the stolen hard drive proving it had been accessed by unauthorized users, and most importantly, the audio recording of Richard admitting to the perjury during the deposition. I picked up my secure phone. I did not dial a lawyer. I dialed a direct line that bypassed the standard switchboard. The voice on the other end answered on the first ring. It was deep, authoritative, and familiar. "Judge Patterson speaking." I leaned back in my chair, watching the city lights flicker outside my window. "Good evening, Your Honor," I said, my voice calm and professional. "This is Agent Davis. I am calling to confirm receipt of the digital evidence package labeled Clean Sweep." There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of a file being opened. "I have it, Agent Davis," the judge replied. "I am reviewing the addendum regarding the stolen government property. Is the chain of custody secure?" "It is, sir," I confirmed. "The tracking device confirms the drive is currently located at the defendant's residence. They have accessed the files. The trap is closed." "Very well," Judge Patterson said. "I will see you in my courtroom at 900 hours. Do not be late." I hung up the phone. I looked at the screen one last time, then reached over and shut down the system. The room went completely dark. Richard and Brandon were out there celebrating their victory, unaware that the man they expected to save them was already signing their arrest warrants. I closed my eyes and finally allowed myself to sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a very long day. The bailiff's voice boomed through the mahogany-paneled courtroom, cutting through the low murmur of the assembled crowd. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Patterson presiding." We stood as the heavy oak door behind the bench swung open. Judge Patterson walked in his black robe, billowing around him like a storm cloud. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the plaintiff's table where my father sat nursing a hangover and a smirk. He walked straight to his chair, sat down, and arranged his files with terrifying precision. His eyes scanned the room, finally landing on me. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of the phone call we had shared 12 hours prior. To the world, he was a neutral arbiter. To me, he was the executioner. "Be seated," the judge said, his voice gravelly and impatient. "We are here on the matter of the estate of Henry Davis. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may proceed." Jasmine stood up. She looked immaculate in a cream-colored suit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun. She picked up her briefcase and walked to the center of the room, her heels clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor. She did not look at the judge immediately. Instead, she turned and pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "Your Honor," she began, her voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, "we are not just here to contest a will, we are here to prevent a crime." She walked back to her table and picked up a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was the small black hard drive my mother had stolen from my apartment. The red tape labeled confidential was clearly visible under the courtroom lights. My clients have uncovered disturbing evidence regarding the defendant, Nicole Davis. Jasmine continued holding the bag up for the gallery to see. While Ms. Davis portrays herself as a humble transcriptionist and a grieving granddaughter, the contents of this hard drive tell a very different story. Richard leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms and grinning. Cynthia patted his arm, her eyes shining with malicious delight. Jasmine approached the bench. Your Honor, this drive contains encrypted ledgers detailing massive wire transfers to offshore accounts in Panama and the Cayman Islands. These are not the savings of a government employee. These are the proceeds of a criminal enterprise. We believe the defendant has been using her position to launder illicit funds, and we argue that this demonstrates a lack of moral character that disqualifies her from serving as the executor of this estate. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I did not object. I did not look surprised. I simply watched Jasmine dig the hole deeper. Judge Patterson looked at the evidence bag. He adjusted his glasses and leaned over the bench. Let me be clear, Counselor, the judge said, his voice dangerously soft. You are submitting this hard drive as physical evidence of the defendant's criminal activity. Yes, Your Honor, Jasmine said, placing the bag on the judge's bench. We are filing an emergency motion to freeze all assets immediately and to remand Ms. Davis into custody, pending a federal investigation. And how exactly did you come into possession of this drive? The judge asked, picking up the bag and inspecting the seal. Jasmine hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was discovered in the family home, Your Honor, in a common area. The defendant left it behind. It was a lie on the record, a lie that turned a theft into a discovery. I see, Judge Patterson said. He did not hand the bag back. Instead, he placed it next to his gavel. He looked at Jasmine, then at Richard, and finally at me. The trap was set. Jasmine had just formally introduced stolen classified government property into a civil trial. She had just admitted that her clients were in possession of the evidence I had planted. Does the defense have any response to this accusation? The judge asked, looking at me. I stood up slowly, buttoning my blazer. I did not walk to the center of the room. I stood my ground. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. I would like to thank the plaintiff for returning my property, and I would like to request that the bailiff lock the doors, because nobody is leaving this room. Cynthia Davis walked to the witness stand with the grace of a woman who believed she was about to be canonized. She had swapped her usual flashy designer prints for a modest navy dress and a string of pearls, attempting to curate the image of a heartbroken matriarch forced to do the unthinkable. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth with a steady voice that betrayed absolutely no hint of the perjury she was about to commit. Jasmine approached the stand holding the plastic evidence bag like a holy relic. She stopped a few feet away, allowing the jury box to get a good look at the mother facing down her daughter. Mrs. Davis, Jasmine began, her voice soft and sympathetic. Can you tell the court how you came into possession of this hard drive? Cynthia took a deep breath, dabbing at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. I went to visit Nicole at her apartment 3 days ago. I was worried about her. She had been acting so erratically since my father passed, and I wanted to see if she needed help. When I arrived, the door was ajar. I walked in calling her name, but she was not there. I watched from the defense table, my face an unreadable mask. It was a bold lie. She had broken into my apartment, but she was painting it as a welfare check. And what did you find? Jasmine asked, leading the witness effortlessly. I found this drive plugged into her laptop, Cynthia said, pointing a manicured finger at the evidence bag. The screen was open. I saw spreadsheets. I saw bank account numbers. I saw transfers to places like the Cayman Islands and Panama, amounts that a transcriptionist simply should not have. A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. Richard leaned forward in his seat, looking vindicated. I was horrified, Cynthia continued, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. My father built this family on integrity. I could not believe my own daughter was using his legacy to launder dirty money. I panicked. I took the drive to preserve the evidence before she could delete it. I knew I had to bring it to the authorities. Jasmine nodded solemnly. And you believe this drive proves that Nicole Davis is unfit to manage the estate? I believe it proves she is a criminal. Cynthia declared, her voice hardening. She is not just unfit, she is dangerous. She has been lying to us for years. Jasmine turned to the judge. Your Honor, we would like to submit this hard drive labeled Exhibit A into evidence. It contains the financial records Mrs. Davis witnessed. We ask that the court take custody of it immediately. Judge Patterson looked at Cynthia. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply extended his hand over the bench. Bring it here, he commanded. Jasmine walked up and placed the bag in his palm. The judge held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the device. He looked at the red confidential tape. He looked at the serial number on the back, which matched the warrant sitting in his chambers. Cynthia beamed at him, confident she had just won. She looked over at me, her eyes full of scorn. She expected to see me crying. She expected to see me begging for mercy. Instead, I lowered my head, letting my hair fall forward to curtain my face. To the gallery and to my mother, it looked like the posture of a defeated woman crushed by the weight of the accusation. But under the shelter of my hair, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. My mother had just testified under oath that she was in possession of classified federal materials. She had just handed the judge the very instrument of her own destruction. The performance was flawless, but she had no idea she was reciting her own sentencing hearing. The courtroom was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the sharp click of the drive engaging with the port on the judge's bench. Judge Patterson stared at his monitor, his face illuminated by the sudden blue glow of the screen. He adjusted his spectacles, leaning in closer, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. For a long minute he said nothing. He simply scrolled. His eyes moved left to right, reading the file names, scanning the metadata, and noting the federal watermarks that were invisible to the untrained eye but glaringly obvious to a man of his clearance level. He saw the folder labeled Cayman Holdings. He saw the subfolder labeled Structural Steel Kickbacks. And he saw the digital signature of the user who had last accessed the files. It was not Nicole. It was a user named Admin logged in from an IP address registered to the Davis family estate. The judge stopped scrolling. His expression shifted from curiosity to a terrifying shade of stone-cold fury. The color drained from his face, not out of shock, but out of disbelief at the sheer audacity of the woman sitting in the witness box. He slowly lifted his head and looked directly at Cynthia. Mrs. Davis, the judge, said, his voice low and vibrating with tension. I want to remind you that you are currently under oath. The penalties for perjury in my courtroom are severe and immediate. Cynthia sat up straighter, mistaking his intensity for outrage at her daughter. I understand, Your Honor. I have nothing to hide. The judge tapped the screen with a heavy finger. You stated for the record that you personally retrieved this hard drive from the defendant's apartment. You stated that you accessed these files. And you stated that you believe the data contained herein is evidence of a serious financial crime. Yes, Cynthia replied, nodding eagerly. It is money laundering, Your Honor. The numbers speak for themselves. We saw millions of dollars being moved through shell companies. We saw the fraud. We saw the theft. It is all there in black and white. My daughter is a criminal, and this drive proves it. Judge Patterson looked at Richard, who was smirking in the front row. He looked at Jasmine, who was already organizing her victory speech. And then he looked back at Cynthia. So let the record show, the judge said, his voice rising, that the witness has confirmed possession of the device, has confirmed viewing the contents, and has confirmed the criminal nature of the data. Yes, Cynthia said, her smile faltering slightly at his tone. Yes, I confirm it. Why is that a problem? Judge Patterson did not answer her. He reached for the phone on his bench and pressed a single button. Marshal, lock the doors, he commanded into the receiver. Cynthia frowned. Excuse me. The judge turned the monitor around so that the screen faced the witness stand. The glow of the display revealed a large red banner across the top of the file directory. It did not say Nicole Davis Personal Files. It read, Department of Justice, Classified Evidence Do Not Remove. Mrs. Davis, the judge said, his voice booming like thunder. You are absolutely right. This drive does contain evidence of a crime. But it is not the crime you think it is. And it certainly does not belong to your daughter. Judge Patterson did not wait for an answer. He pressed a button on his console and the large projection screen descended behind the witness stand, blocking the emblem of the state. The courtroom lights dimmed automatically, plunging the gallery into a twilight of anticipation. The spreadsheet Cynthia had been so eager to expose appeared in high definition. Columns of red numbers cascaded down the wall like a waterfall of guilt. Every transfer, every hidden fee, every illicit withdrawal was magnified 10 feet tall for the entire world to see. Mrs. Davis, look at the screen, the judge commanded, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. You identified these transactions as evidence of a crime, and you are absolutely correct. This is a textbook example of layering and integration. Millions of dollars siphoned from a legitimate construction firm into untraceable offshore shell companies. Cynthia nodded, her pearls rattling against her collarbone as she trembled. See, I told you, she is a thief. She stole from the family. Look closer, Mrs. Davis, the judge interrupted, his tone cutting through her vindication like a knife. Look at the beneficiary field. Look at the signatory on the account. The cursor on the screen moved, controlled by the judge. It highlighted a name in bold black letters. It was not Nicole Davis. It was Richard Davis. The courtroom gasped. A murmur of confusion rippled through the pews. Cynthia squinted at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. No, she whispered. That is a mistake. That is the wrong file. It is the file you provided, Mrs. Davis, the judge said relentlessly. It is the file you swore under oath was the smoking gun. And you are right. It is. But you missed one crucial detail. The cursor moved again, scrolling down to the bottom of the document where the file properties were listed. This document was not created by a criminal, the judge announced, his voice rising to fill the room. It was created by an investigator. Look at the author field. The screen zoomed in. The words were impossible to miss. Author Special Agent Nicole Davis, Department of Justice, Financial Crimes Division, Status Active Investigation. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb having detonated, but the shockwave not yet hitting. Judge Patterson leaned back, his eyes cold. Your daughter is not a transcriptionist, Mrs. Davis. She is a federal agent. And for the last 2 years, she has been building a RICO case against your husband using the access you so graciously provided. Richard Davis shot up from his seat, his face draining of blood until he looked like a walking corpse. His heavy leather chair clattered loudly to the floor behind him. That is a lie, he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. That is a forgery! She planted it. She is lying. Sit down, Mr. Davis, the bailiff barked, stepping forward with his hand on his holster. But Richard was past the point of reason. He looked at the screen where his entire life of crime was displayed in high definition. He looked at Jasmine, whose face had gone gray, as she realized she had just facilitated a federal sting operation. And finally, he looked at me. I sat perfectly still at the defense table. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply held his gaze, my eyes clear and cold. I was no longer his daughter. I was the law. And the trial was over before it had even begun. The silence in the courtroom was not empty. It was heavy, pressing down on the lungs of everyone present. I stood up from the defense table, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to shrink. I did not smooth my skirt or tuck my hair behind my ears. I buttoned my blazer with a single decisive click and walked to the center of the aisle. My posture changed. The slouch of the submissive granddaughter vanished, replaced by the rigid spine of a federal agent who had spent 2 years hunting predators. I turned to face the gallery, my eyes sweeping over the faces of the people who had mocked me. I looked at Brandon, whose mouth was hanging open. I looked at Jasmine, who was furiously texting on her phone, likely trying to liquidate her own assets before the freeze order hit. And finally, I looked at my father. "Your Honor," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, devoid of the soft tremble I had perfected for my family. "I would like to formally correct the record regarding my occupation." I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out my credentials, flipping the leather wallet open to reveal the gold shield and the ID card. "My name is Nicole Davis. I am a senior forensic auditor for the United States Department of Justice Financial Crimes Division." A collective gasp ripped through the room. Richard gripped the edge of the bench in front of him, his knuckles turning white. "For the past 24 months, I have been the lead investigator on Operation Glasshouse." I continued, my tone clinical and cold. "I was not typing transcription files in that hospital room. I was logging the IP addresses of the offshore accounts my grandfather was forced to create under duress. I was not sitting in my apartment struggling to pay rent. I was monitoring the encrypted servers where this family hid the $40 million they stole from the company pension fund." I turned slowly to face the witness stand. My mother was still sitting there, clutching her pearls, her face a mask of absolute horror. "And Mrs. Davis," I said, addressing her with the formal detachment of a prosecutor, "I want to thank you." Cynthia flinched as if I had struck her. "Thank me," she whispered. "Yes," I said, stepping closer until I was standing right at the rail of the witness box. "We had the bank records for months. We knew the money was moving, but we needed the link. We needed to prove that the family was not just passive beneficiaries, but active participants in the laundering scheme." I pointed to the black hard drive sitting on the judge's bench. "When you broke into my apartment and stole that drive, you thought you were finding leverage. You were actually retrieving a federal bait device. That drive is equipped with a passive GPS tracker and a keystroke logger." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "When you took it home, you established the chain of custody. When you hired a hacker to crack the encryption, you proved intent. And when you stood up in this court and swore under oath that the files on that drive were yours to expose, you confirmed that you had knowledge of the illicit funds. You didn't just hand the judge evidence of a crime, Mother. You handed him your own confession." Cynthia looked at the judge, then back at me. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a woman realizing she had walked willingly into her own cage. I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the Department of Justice requests that the defendants be remanded into custody immediately. The trap is sprung." Judge Patterson turned his gaze slowly from the witness stand to the defense table. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room where a life was about to be dismantled. Jasmine Vance, who had strutted into the courthouse like a queen inspecting her subjects, was now staring at the table, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the mahogany surface. She knew the law better than anyone in the room, which meant she knew exactly how deep the grave she had dug really was. "Counselor," the judge said, his voice slicing through the air like a guillotine blade, "please stand up." Jasmine hesitated. For a second she looked at the exit as if calculating the distance. Then she slowly pushed her chair back. The scrape of the metal legs against the parquet floor sounded like a scream. She stood up, but her usual poise was gone. Her shoulders were hunched, and her face was the color of old ash. "Ms. Vance," Judge Patterson continued, leaning over the bench, his eyes locking onto hers with terrifying intensity. "You are an officer of the court. You took an oath to uphold the law and to act with candor and integrity. Yet, in the last hour, you have facilitated perjury. You have introduced stolen federal property into the record. And you have filed a motion based on evidence obtained through the commission of a felony." "I was not aware, Your Honor." Jasmine stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "My clients told me. Do not blame your clients, the judge snapped, cutting her off. You are the attorney of record. It is your job to vet your evidence. Instead, you chose to represent a criminal enterprise. You chose to engage in a conspiracy to defraud the rightful heir of this estate. And most egregiously, you attempted to use this court as a weapon to destroy the reputation and career of a high-ranking federal agent. Richard looked up at his lawyer, expecting her to fight back. He expected her to pull out a loophole or a technicality, but Jasmine was silent. She was shaking. You have not just failed your client, Ms. Vance, the judge, said, his voice dropping to a low, deadly rumble. You have failed your profession. I am declaring a mistrial in the civil matter of the Davis estate effective immediately. But I am not done with you. He picked up a pen and began writing on a form, the scratching sound echoing in the quiet room. I am referring this entire transcript to the State Bar Association Board of Overseers with a recommendation for immediate disbarment. I am also forwarding your case file to the U.S. Attorney's Office for review regarding charges of obstruction of justice and suborning perjury. You walked in here a partner at a top firm. You are leaving as a suspect in a federal investigation. Jasmine looked at the judge, then at me. Her eyes were wide and vacant. The reality of it hit her like a physical blow. The corner office, the partnerships, the reputation she had spent 20 years building with ruthlessness and greed. It was all gone, incinerated in less than 5 minutes. She tried to say something. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her knees simply gave way. She did not faint gracefully. She collapsed. She slumped sideways, crashing into her chair before sliding down to the floor in a heap of expensive fabric and ruined ambition. Richard stared down at her, his mouth agape. His shield was gone. His attack dog was whimpering on the floor. For the first time, he realized he was completely exposed. Bailiff, the judge called out, not even looking down at the fallen lawyer. Call the paramedics if you must, but do not let anyone leave this room. We are waiting for the FBI. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a resounding crash that silenced the murmurs of the gallery. 4 U.S. Marshals marched in, moving with the heavy synchronized rhythm of a tactical unit. They were not wearing suits. They were in full tactical gear with bulletproof vests and badges hanging from chains around their necks. They did not look at the judge or the unconscious lawyer on the floor. Their eyes were locked on one target. Richard Davis froze. The arrogance that had sustained him for decades evaporated in an instant, leaving behind only the trembling shell of a coward. He scrambled backward, knocking his expensive leather chair over with a loud clatter. "Stay back," he shouted, holding his hands up as if to ward them off. "You have no right. I am a CEO. I demand to speak to my attorneys." The lead marshal, a man with a buzz cut and eyes like flint, ignored the protest. He vaulted the low railing separating the gallery from the well of the court and grabbed Richard by the shoulder. He spun him around with practiced force, slamming his chest against the polished mahogany table. The sound of air leaving Richard's lungs was audible in the sudden silence. "Richard Davis, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." The marshal barked, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You have the right to remain silent. Get your hands off me!" Richard screamed, struggling uselessly against the iron grip. He twisted his head, looking frantically around the room for an ally. His eyes landed on his son. "It wasn't me!" Richard shrieked, spit flying from his lips. "It was him. It was Brandon. He has a gambling problem. He forced me to sign those checks. I was just trying to help my son. Arrest him. He is the thief. He is the one who took the money." Brandon, who had been watching the scene with wide, terrified eyes, let out a high-pitched whimper. Hearing his own father offer him up as a sacrifice broke something inside him. He did not run. He did not argue. He simply dissolved. He slid out of his chair and crawled underneath the heavy defense table, curling into a ball on the dusty floor. He covered his ears with his hands, rocking back and forth and muttering "no" over and over again. I stood at the prosecution table and watched the man who used to terrify me beg for his life while betraying his own blood. It was pathetic. The great patriarch of the Davis dynasty was nothing more than a rat trapped in a corner, willing to eat his own young to survive. The marshal clicked the handcuffs onto Richard's wrists, tightening them until Richard winced. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," the marshal recited, hauling Richard to his feet. Richard was sobbing now, huge, racking tears that ruined his silk tie. "Nicole, please tell them. Tell them I am your father. You cannot let them take me." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had cut off my health insurance, the man who had mocked my poverty, the man who had stolen millions. "I am not your daughter today, Richard," I said, my voice cold and final. "I am the witness for the prosecution. Get him out of my sight." The heavy doors swung shut behind Richard, cutting off his screams, but the silence he left behind was worse. It was the silence of a kingdom collapsing. Two marshals knelt down and dragged Brandon out from under the defense table. He was limp, weeping openly, his expensive suit covered in dust. He did not fight them. He just let them cuff him, looking like a child who had woken up in a nightmare. Cynthia stood alone in the witness box. Her allies were in handcuffs. Her lawyer was unconscious on the floor. She looked at the marshals sealing the exits, and then she looked at me. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The accounts were frozen. The house was designated a federal crime scene. She had nowhere to go. She had no access to money. And she was standing in a room full of people who had just watched her perjure herself. She scrambled down from the stand, stumbling in her haste. She ran toward the prosecution table, her hands reaching out. "Nicole," she gasped, grabbing my arm with a grip that was desperate and terrified. "Nicole, please, you have to stop this. They are taking everyone. They are going to take the house. Where am I supposed to live?" She looked into my eyes, searching for the daughter she had bullied for years, hoping to find a trace of the girl who used to crave her approval. I did not know she sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "I swear to you, I did not know it was illegal. I just did what your father told me. You cannot let them take me to jail. I am your mother. We are family. You have to fix this. Tell the judge it was a mistake. Tell them I was confused." I looked down at her hand, clutching my sleeve. The same hand that had stolen the hard drive. The same hand that had signed the affidavits to disinherit me. I reached out and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. I stepped back, creating a chasm between us that no apology could cross. "A mistake," I repeated, my voice flat and devoid of sympathy. "5 minutes ago, you stood on that stand and swore under oath that I was a criminal. You handed the judge evidence you stole, hoping it would send me to federal prison for 20 years. You wanted me in a cage so you could keep your diamonds. You were willing to bury your own child to protect your lifestyle." "But Nicole," she wailed, trying to grab me again. "I was scared. We can start over. Just you and me." I shook my head. "You are not a bystander, Mother. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice. You transported stolen goods across state lines. You facilitated wire fraud. And you just confessed to it all on the public record." I signaled to the marshal standing behind her. He stepped forward, his face impassive. "Save your tears," I said, turning my back on her as the marshal took her arm. "You are going to need them for the sentencing hearing. And do not call me daughter. Call a public defender." The dust had barely settled in the federal courthouse when I walked into the executive boardroom of Davis Construction for the last time. The room was filled with the remaining board members, men who had spent years turning a blind eye to my father's crimes in exchange for fat bonuses. They sat in uncomfortable silence, their eyes darting toward the empty chair at the head of the table where Richard used to hold court. I did not sit. I stood at the head of the table, placing a single thin file on the polished mahogany. It contained the original, unadulterated will of Henry Davis. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room, "as you know, the federal government has seized all assets related to the operational accounts of this company due to the ongoing RICO investigation. However, my grandfather was a man of foresight. He kept his personal holdings and the original land deeds in a separate blind trust, a trust that remained untouched by my father's greed. I opened the file. Because the previous executors are currently being processed at the Federal Detention Center, control of that trust has reverted to the sole beneficiary. Me. One of the directors, a man named Sterling, cleared his throat nervously. Miss Davis, we understand this is a difficult transition, but we are prepared to work with you to stabilize the stock price. We can rebrand. We can distance ourselves from Richard. I looked at him. Sterling had signed off on the audits that hid the embezzlement. There will be no rebranding, Mr. Sterling, I said. I am not here to save this company. I am here to bury it. A murmur of shock went through the room. The Davis name has become synonymous with fraud, I continued. I will not allow my grandfather's legacy to be used as a shield for criminals any longer. Effective immediately, I am initiating the liquidation of all clean assets held in the trust. The land, the equipment, the intellectual property. It is all being sold. But that is madness, Sterling protested, standing up. That is tens of millions of dollars. You are throwing away a fortune. I am not throwing it away, I corrected him. I am redirecting it. Every cent from the sale will go toward establishing the Henry Davis Foundation. It will be a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid and financial restitution to victims of corporate fraud. The money my father stole destroyed lives. The money my grandfather left me will rebuild them. I looked around the table, meeting the gaze of every man present. As for the board, I said, closing the file, your services are no longer required. You were the stewards of this company and you watched it rot from the inside out. You are all complicit. I pressed the intercom button on the table. Security, please escort the former board members to the exit. Their badges are deactivated. But what about Brandon? Sterling stammered, desperate to find a lever. He is a shareholder. You cannot just fire him. Brandon is currently facing 15 years for wire fraud. I said, my voice cold. He has been terminated for cause. His shares are forfeit under the morality clause of the corporate charter. A clause I believe you wrote, Mr. Sterling. The security guards entered the room. I watched as the men who had once looked at me with disdain were marched out carrying their cardboard boxes. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Boston skyline. The company was gone. The fortune was gone. But for the first time in years, the air in the room felt clean. Grandfather was finally at peace. And so was I. The air outside the federal courthouse was crisp and cold, a perfect Boston afternoon. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, muffling the sound of the gavel that had just ended the Davis dynasty. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that finally tasted clean. For the first time in years, the weight on my chest was gone. The sky above was a brilliant, piercing blue, the kind of sky that promised clarity. Below me on the sidewalk, a chaotic sea of reporters and cameras surged against the police barricades. They were waiting for the main event, and they didn't have to wait long. The side exit burst open and the U.S. Marshals emerged, escorting the remnants of my family. Richard was first, his head bowed low, a coat thrown over his handcuffs to hide the shame. He looked small. The titan of industry, who had terrorized his employees and his daughter, was just an old man in a wrinkled suit, shuffling toward a federal transport van. Then came Brandon, stumbling and weeping, the flashbulbs blinding him as he realized his life of privilege was over. And finally, Cynthia. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked shell-shocked, staring blankly at the cameras that were capturing her disgrace for the evening news. She scanned the crowd, looking for a savior, looking for me. But I was already gone. I walked down the main steps, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the pavement. A reporter spotted me and shouted over the din. Ms. Davis. Ms. Davis, do you have a comment on your father's arrest? Do you have anything to say to the victims? I didn't answer. I didn't even slow down. I walked past them, my expression unreadable. I was no longer a part of their story. I was the ghost that had haunted them, and now I was the wind that blew them away. A sleek black government SUV idled at the curb, the engine purring. The tinted window rolled down an inch, revealing a familiar face. Agent Miller, my partner for the last 5 years, gave me a curt nod. "Get in," he said. "The press is going to swarm in about 30 seconds." I slid into the cool leather interior and the door slammed shut with a solid, reassuring thud. The noise of the crowd vanished, replaced by the quiet hum of a secure vehicle. I looked out the tinted glass one last time. My family was being loaded into the back of a paddy wagon, the flashing blue lights reflecting off the glass. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the absolute lightness of a job well done. The cord was cut. Miller looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Rough day at the office." "Just another Tuesday," I replied, pulling my seatbelt across my chest. He handed me a secure tablet over his shoulder. "The director just sent this over, the laundering scheme in the Midwest. It is bigger than we thought. They are moving assets through a charity network." I took the tablet and unlocked it, my eyes scanning the preliminary data. New names, new numbers, a new puzzle to solve. I swiped the screen, clearing the notification about the Davis estate sale and opening the file labeled Operation Windy City. I looked up at the road ahead. The past was behind me, locked in a cell. The future was waiting. "Drive?" I said, my voice steady and clear. "We have a case in Chicago.